How did the seclusion of Japan improve Japanese economy through infrastructure, education, and production during the Tokugawa era? The seclusion of Japan improved the Japanese economy through the development and construction of infrastructure, which facilitated the strength of the internal trade network of Japan. The unification and seclusion of Japan allowed for literacy to be readily available to the public, resulting in efficient work for laborers in the economy. Lastly, the reduced freedom to receive trade items from external countries established independence in the Japanese production of technology and goods. The development and construction of infrastructure facilitated the strength of the internal trade network of Japan. Local lords invested in building bridges, roads, irrigation systems, and market activities. With the new edict, it was punishable by death to leave Japan and foreigners were not allowed entry. Unable to focus on modes of transport related to trade externally, local lords invested in enhancing travel routes internally by building safer, secure paths. These safer roads reduced the difficulty and risk of traveling for villagers, allowing them to trade with neighboring villages, which increased internal trade. Main and branch highways were built. Large urban cities were connected by roads. The construction of main and branch highways further improved safer transportation of people and trade items. The roads were built to connect cities, which had bustling populations and more people to trade with, which produced more trade goods. The safety, popularity, and convenience of these highways resulted in a stronger internal trade network that advanced the economy. Notes, messages, and items were delivered using the Tokaido Road, and state lords communicated through the road. While trade goods were also exchanged, information was communicated through the roads. The safety of the roads promoted an easier way to communicate with other regions. Traders or civilians had an easier way to contact each other to exchange goods with, which strengthened internal trade within Japan. The unification and seclusion of Japan allowed for literacy to be readily available to the public, resulting in efficient work for laborers in the economy. The majority of citizens were not literate before the Tokugawa unification. Prior to the unification under Ieyasu Tokugawa, Japan was in a state of constant warfare for power between different regions, states, and lords as well as surrounding countries. The fighting would burn village buildings, such as schools, and distract the populace from focusing on education or literacy. Civilians were sent to study basic literacy at elementary schools called Terakoya. The Union of Japan ceased warfare between regions and countries, allowing for citizens to focus on learning literacy. Schools were able to be built without the threat of destruction. As a result, the people of Japan would become increasingly literate as it was readily available. Japanese women and men were encouraged to be literate and practice poems, paintings, and calligraphy. With the rise of literate citizens, practices in the arts became available. The expansion in the arts produced more artistic pieces that were profitable, which opened new types of businesses. This opened more trade opportunities in the market, allowing for the economy to expand into more areas. By 1820, banks and other economic institutions were built as populations increased. As more people knew how to read and write, being able to exchange information became easier. Banks were constructed to handle the finances of Japanese citizens, and workers were able to efficiently work because they learned literacy. Other economic institutions were built with the rise of educated laborers, which would further improve organization and strength of the economy. The reduced freedom to receive trade items from external countries established independence in the Japanese production of goods. Scholars focused on translating informational texts from the Dutch, then produced new technologies and painting techniques. Despite being secluded, they had limited trading with the Dutch and would receive occasional informational European texts. The restrictions on communication with foreigners, followed with a lack of new information from other people, resulted in the production of new technology or techniques based off of what the Japanese had access to. The production of domestic sugar, ginseng, rice, and wheat increased. Before the seclusion, China frequently traded crops and sources of food with the Japanese. With the new edict, the Japanese could no longer depend on the Chinese for crops and began farming their own agricultural supplies, which produced new stocks and farming techniques. Domestic production of fabrics and silks increased by up to 400,000 during the Tokugawa period. Silk was traded with the Japanese from the Chinese and was not noticeably produced in Japan prior to the seclusion. Once the Japanese no longer had access to silk in surrounding countries, silk had to be produced domestically. This reduced any dependency on other countries for supplies and promoted laborers to produce materials independently. Overall, due to the inability to focus on transport leading to external commerce, the Japanese strengthened internal trading and informational networks with safer infrastructure, allowing for a bustling market economy within Japan. Furthermore, by being secluded and unified into one body, any threats or conflict or violence were limited, enabling the population to focus on literacy and business and strengthening the economy. Finally, the restrictions on getting items externally promoted the Japanese to adapt and produce their own goods, directing them to become independent in their own production.